All right, now we can actually get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Rosie Pasqualini, and I am the program assistant here at the KU Alzheimer's Disease Research Center's LEAP program. LEAP, as many of you may know, stands for Lifestyle Empowerment for Alzheimer's Prevention. We provide a variety of programs to help people improve their brain health and well-being. So I'm going to provide a quick overview of the ADRC, the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, for those of you who may not be familiar with it. The ADRC was established in 2004, and it is one of only 33 research institutions for Alzheimer's disease that is accredited by the National Institutes of Health. Which is pretty amazing. We've been accredited since 2011 and have to re-earn that accreditation every single year through a pretty rigorous process. Also, sorry if you all can hear the airplane or some sort of flying, some sort of UFO outside my window. That's pretty loud, should go away in a second. Anyway, the mission of the ADRC is to improve the lives of patients and families who are dealing with Alzheimer's disease or are at risk by eliminating the disease through treatment and prevention, as well as providing support. Here is some quick-ish info about what we provide at the ADRC. We do research on individuals both with and without cognitive impairments. We have a cohort study that is following a group of people for many years to understand disease risk and how the disease works. We have trials related specifically to medicine. We have psychosocial interventions, and we have interventions specifically related to exercise and lifestyle. In addition, we have the LEAP program, which, as I've stated, is a collection of courses and sometimes presentations like this one that empower people who are interested to take charge of their brain health and well-being with lifestyle interventions. Finally, we have a number of other resources that I will send you a follow-up email after this presentation about, including My Alliance for Brain Health, which kind of ties all of these resources together. And we also have a weekly newsletter with helpful brain tips and other information. We have support groups, both for those struggling with dementia or mild cognitive impairments and caregivers. And we have a brain health navigator whom you can call to find out about all these resources and get what you need. All right, so that's an overview of the ADRC. Now on to neuroplasticity. I wanted to sort of quickly mention that neuroplasticity is a topic that I love because it is at the core of all of the lifestyle interventions and sort of core topics that we cover at LEAP. Neuroplasticity is sort of the key to why stuff like stress management and sleep and cognitive engagement can boost your brain health. And so I'm excited to talk about it with you today. This is an overview of what we'll talk about. So I will give you a clearer definition of neuroplasticity. I'll talk about neuroplasticity during different stages of life. I'll talk about its two main roles, which are learning and recovery. And I'll talk about the relationship between neuroplasticity and Alzheimer's disease or other types of dementia. We will explore the building blocks of neuroplasticity, which I've divided into neuron health and cognitive engagement. And then I will talk about some specific ways to help promote neuroplasticity to make your brain more resilient. And then I'll share some study examples that hopefully you'll find interesting, and you will be able to ask any questions you like. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to restructure itself in response to either new information or injury. And it is an essential feature of your brain at every single stage of life. If you think about sort of what your brain really is, and that may sound a little silly, it is a bunch of brain cells or neurons that are arranged in these different ways with information that passes through them in the form of electricity or chemicals, or sometimes a combination. And so the physical structure of these brain cells is what determines or helps to determine your habits, your behaviors, and even your thoughts. So neuroplasticity is your brain's specific ability to respond to changes in the environment, like new information, or changes in itself, such as damage, to alter how these neurons connect to each other. And as we'll discuss, it is key to your brain's adaptability, especially when it comes to disease. Here you can see an illustration of some neurons developing new connections. Now, I want to kind of add a caveat here, which is you may be aware that neuroplasticity has been a hot topic in brain science for quite some time, or you may not, which is also totally fine. And at one point, it was kind of seen as this holy grail for brain health. And I don't want to seem like I am, over-promising here or thinking that it can cure major issues, because it cannot. It has plenty of limits and it waxes and wanes throughout our lifetime. It cannot cure dementia or related conditions, but it can play a major role in prevention and in symptom management. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. An important thing about neuroplasticity, many people think of it as being exclusively positive, but that's actually not true. It's important to remember that your brain balances stability and plasticity. So a hypothetical brain that was totally plastic would actually be a very bad thing, because it would not be able to retain any new information at all. Even a newborn baby, or even the brain of a fetus, which are basically, these brains are kind of absolute sponges, just absorbing new information, have some level of brain stability that kind of provides a backdrop for the new information coming in. On the flip side, a person with a completely stable, unchanging brain, where it can't change its physical structure at all, would not be able to learn any new information. An example of this is that your brain physically changes every time you encode a new memory. So a person whose brain was not plastic at all would not form any new memories. And a plastic, a plastic, of course, is a specific type of material that can either change its form or hold its previous form depending on circumstances like heat. And so that's why we use the plastic analogy for the brain and for neuroplasticity. So going off of that sort of positive and negative balance, when developing, kids can learn positive skills and habits quite quickly, but they also learn harmful habits just as easily. So brains are most adaptable in childhood when we're developing our first models of how the world works. And sorry about those notifications, I'll mute that. And they're less adaptable in adulthood when we want to preserve those strategies that we've collected over the years. I'm going to go over some of the differences in neuroplasticity throughout stages of life. So in childhood, we have very high plasticity in general, and we go through critical periods of development. These are periods of time during development that are key for specific skills to be developing, or rather abilities. So an example of this is that for vision, if a child is born with a cataract that's not corrected within the first few months of life, they will likely have impaired vision for the rest of their life because they missed the critical period to develop vision. A similar example is language. So this is a bit complicated because there are certain aspects of language like vocabulary that do not have a critical period. But for some aspects like learning new grammar, there's a critical period during childhood when that is most possible. And that is why we are much better at learning our first languages oftentimes than our second languages if we're learning them later in life. Adolescence is kind of a strange case in terms of neuroplasticity because there needs to be a lot more research on it. But there's a similar critical period, is at least what the current research says, between the ages of 12 and 15 specifically, where some higher cognitive functions are developed. In adolescence, newer research seems to suggest that neuroplasticity is actually mediated by sex hormones. So there are some sex differences in the types of plasticity that are developed in different types of the brain. Now, I am not, or sorry, different areas of the brain. I'm not an expert, but I think this is kind of fascinating, and a lot more research is needed to understand neuroplasticity in adolescents specifically. Finally, in earlier and mid-adulthood, and then older adulthood, there are no critical periods, but there is continued plasticity. And people used to think this was not the case at all, that our brain just kind of stopped adapting, which is a little silly because we know that every time we learn something, our brain shape changes. In older adulthood, in addition to that continued plasticity, although it is lower, we actually develop more symmetrical brain activation. And many people have hypothesized that this is because your brain starts to compensate for some of the natural decline that happens in older adulthood. So your brain starts recruiting naturally different parts of the brain to perform key tasks. And in some cases, this can be an advantage to your thinking. Some studies appear to show that older adults may have better inductive reasoning than younger adults for this reason, because they're naturally involving more parts of their brain. So that's an overview of how neuroplasticity works across these different stages of life. Now we'll go over the two main roles of neuroplasticity that I've already kind of hinted at, but to better understand them, those are learning from new experiences and regaining function after injury or maintaining function. And I will explain how those work. So when we learn from new experiences, as I said, all learning restructures your brain. So for example, as you're watching this presentation, some of your brain cells are being activated. Some connections are being strengthened, others are being weakened, and these connections will be reactivated when you remember this information. That itself is an example of neuroplasticity. And interestingly, not all learning happens when you're actively working with information. So this is one reason why if you're working on a project, or if there's a problem in your life that you want to sort out, you might find that overnight a solution has come to you. Now, not always. I wish this would happen to me more often, but that is sort of a result of your brain literally working on those problems, especially while you sleep. In addition to learning, the other important role of neuroplasticity is regaining function after injury. So injury here usually refers to something like a traumatic brain injury, something like a blunt force injury from a car accident or a stroke. Here we have an example of Broca's area being damaged in a stroke. And in this person, you can see that the equivalent area on the right side of their brain was rewired to help perform those functions. So when part of your brain is damaged, your brain may integrate another sort of second best area, and essentially it will start learning how to perform those lost functions. There are two other sort of types of injury I'd like to talk about. The first one is acute psychological injury, and such as a traumatic event that may not be physical trauma, but could be emotional trauma. Your brain is able to to certain degrees, adapt to those. It may depend on whether or not the event rewires your brain in a more negative or more adaptive way. But in general, you have sort of this mechanism that helps you, especially with the help of therapy, to recover from difficult psychological situations or conditions. And finally, the last thing that I'd like to talk about that is relevant here is physical damage from Alzheimer's or another kind of dementia, such as the buildup of amyloid proteins. And that's what we'll talk about now. Again, neuroplasticity is not a treatment for dementia, but it does play a major role in prevention and in sometimes can reduce symptoms. So by making healthy choices, we can help our brains achieve a better level of neuroplasticity to reduce disease risk or to manage symptoms. So something that is frustrating, but also sort of heartening at the same time is that when it comes to neuroplasticity, prevention or symptom management is not a targeted approach in terms of targeting a specific part of the brain. The reason for this is that you essentially want as much of your brain to be as healthy as possible, so that if you sustain damage from something like amyloid buildup, your brain is more easily able to use its neuroplasticity to recruit some of the other parts of the brain to regain those lost functions. So engaging many different parts of the brain is important, and I'll talk about ways to do that in a minute here. To give just a little more depth to these ideas, I wanted to talk about some Alzheimer's factors and some ways that neuroplasticity can either help reduce the effect of the disease or help reduce risk. So some risk factors are that you're more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease if your neurons are more susceptible to damage, if you have higher levels of inflammation in your brain and body, if you're having trouble generating new neurons, and everyone is generating new neurons through all stages of life, but certain factors can make this harder. And if you don't have enough pre-existing conditions to help your brain rewire itself, as I was talking about. So basically, to increase your neuroplasticity, and also as a benefit of neuroplasticity, you got these new connections. You want to try and build more resilient neurons, lower your inflammation levels, encourage that neurogenesis, and I'll talk about how, and try and build those pre-existing conditions to mitigate, connections to mitigate damage. This may sound like a long list, and it kind of is, but I will divide this into sort of two main categories that can really help you improve and increase your neuroplasticity. So there are these two main ingredients for helping your brain to get a higher level of neuroplasticity and adaptability. So I'll go over what they are and the main ways to boost them. The first thing that you want to boost is your neuron health and regeneration. So these are the building blocks of neuroplasticity. If you want to be able to rewire your brain in response to learning and injury, you need to have healthy neurons. And then once that you have those healthy neurons, much of that actual active rewiring depends on environmental factors and challenges to which your brain responds. So in general, once you have those building blocks, that rewiring needs to be triggered by something. This is not always the case. For example, studies show that aerobic exercise alone can both increase neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, and improve cognitive function without training, which is pretty amazing, and exercise is one of the top things that we recommend. But in general, stacking that cognitive engagement on top of that regeneration is going to be really helpful for promoting neuroplasticity. So in terms of neuron health and regeneration, children make a whole lot of new neurons, and scientists used to think that adults didn't produce any new neurons at all. But we actually do generate new neurons in this area of the brain called the hippocampus. There might be an evolutionary reason why we maintain the ability to generate neurons in this region specifically, because this is actually one of the top areas affected in dementia. The fact that we can generate new neurons here may serve as protection, potential protection against developing dementia, or a way to potentially lessen its symptoms. So this part of the brain is involved in memory, learning, and emotion regulation. And a fun fact is that the hippocampus is shaped like a seahorse. That's why it's called hippocampus, hippo meaning horse. Here are some specific ways to promote neuron health and regeneration. This is not an exhaustive list, and if you participate in Brain Health Bootcamp, we talk about additional strategies to do this. But the top one, I would say, is both is a combination of physical activity and aerobic exercise. A common confusion is about what the difference between physical activity and exercise is. Physical activity is basically any movement you're doing throughout the day, while aerobic exercise is more structured and usually specifically geared toward improving your cardiac function and oxygenation. So stuff like brisk walking, running, etc. But with both of these, there's plenty of evidence that these improve the amount of oxygen you get to your brain, which is great for generating those new neurons. And some studies show that both of these things, physical activity and aerobic exercise, increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is one of the chemicals that tells your brain produce new neurons. So you may directly influence that neuron production in the hippocampus by increasing physical activity and aerobic exercise. Secondly, getting enough omega-3s as part of a brain healthy diet is very important for those building blocks. Your brain thrives off of fats, especially anti-inflammatory fats. And so omega-3s, which are found in things like nuts and seeds and fish, are very important for the health of neuron membranes. And they also help control inflammation, which is a threat to neuroplasticity and your general neuron health. So increasing your intake of omega-3s can really make a big difference in your neuroplasticity and overall brain health. A quick note about stress. I'm not going to go deeply into stress here because it's fairly complicated, but you may have heard the idea that stress kills neurons. This is a stressful thing to hear, and I wanted to tell you that it is not true. Stress does not kill neurons. The studies that were done demonstrating that they had technical problems. Now, excessive stress can have some effects on neuron function and make it a little bit harder for your brain to adapt to tricky situations. So it is important to manage stress in order to promote neuron health. But in case you had heard this myth, basically, I wanted to assure you that the effect is not as extreme as the idea of stress killing neurons. And if you're interested in learning more about stress and brain health, that's another thing that we cover in Brain Health Bootcamp. So once that you have those building blocks, it's gonna make it easier for your brain to rewire itself in an adaptive way. And as I said, some of this can happen without any other effort on your part, without increasing your engagement. However, it is also important to try and get some cognitive engagement, engaging with the world, challenging your mind in order to specifically trigger that rewiring. And so the most effective activities to do this are things that involve several parts of the brain, which might sound complicated, but many activities do, in fact, all activities. Those that are sort of the most effective in that sense are things that combine motor function and cognition. So things like dancing, things like organizing, building stuff around your house are all great examples, as well as creative activities, stuff like music making, writing, and art. And these are really good for getting your brain to make use of that sort of new neural power it gets from those building blocks. Something you want to focus on with cognitive engagements is making sure that you are being productive in your engagement, really being active, like learning a new skill, as opposed to passively consuming information. Now, these are both good for your brain. There's nothing wrong with learning new information. I love to do that because information does literally rewire your brain. But recent studies, specifically in older adults, had this cool title called the Experience Core Project, showed that productive engagement, which was skill-based learning, improved cognitive function way more dramatically than simply learning new information, say from a book or a show. And they specifically defined productive engagement in this case as, quote, new learning that requires consistent engagement of working memory, motor skills, reasoning, and social challenge. Social engagement is an important part of cognitive engagement because social skills are kind of their own category of skill that can be really helpful to be trained on. It activates a lot of parts of your brain and is very good for your brain. If these sort of more intense activities sound a little bit overwhelming, like these specific parameters, I wanted to note that they're studying these things in a lab. So they're not really seeing what people are doing with the rest of their day. They're not studying like whether or not cognitive engagement builds up over the day, because that's very difficult to study, though people have tried to. This was a specific intervention where they were just manipulating engagement in this, hour of the day. And so it makes sense that in this case, if you're just going off of that hour every day, really productive engagement would show a big difference. But it's also likely that moderate engagement throughout your day, just like taking a new route to work or interacting with new people, making a new recipe, stuff like that, can be very good for your brain. And we want to see cognitive engagement, hopefully not too much as a chore, but as something to incorporate into your everyday life. So here are just some key points specifically about promoting neuroplasticity in your own life. To promote those building blocks of neuron health, we want to get a lot of physical activity and exercise. Let me be a little clearer here. So the recommendation for physical activity or moving around is getting up and moving around, say getting a glass of water every 20 to 30 minutes. Which may sound like a lot, but you can start with, say, every hour or every 2 hours or whatever is just a little bit more than what you're currently getting. For aerobic exercise, the recommendation is 150 minutes a week. But again, you can start much lower if you're not currently sort of adapted to exercise or it's not part of your routine. And any exercise or physical activity can make a big difference. Then getting omega-3s is important from stuff like fish and nuts and seeds. Stress management and sleep are both very important. And I know that I didn't discuss those as much during this presentation because I wanted to keep it not horrifically long, but we talk about these in Brain Health Bootcamp. So if you join Brain Health Bootcamp, you'll learn a lot more about all these contributing factors to neuron health. Finally, that engagement piece, the actual rewiring, requires or is greatly helped by challenging several parts of the brain with various activities and activities such as some of the ones that I described, like music, motor skills, social engagement. And as I just said, staying socially connected is also very, very good for your brain. And it is also an individual contributor to brain health in general. So you get benefits from social connection that you don't get from any other kinds of cognitive engagement. Okay, well, we're almost done here. The last thing I wanted to discuss very quickly was, in case you were wondering about actual study examples, here are a few, and I will not go into depth, but for example, recent research shows that those new neurons continue to form across all stages of life in the hippocampus. Cardiorespiratory fitness, so caused by aerobic exercise, has a direct link to mental fitness and to prefrontal oxygenation. And this is across all ages. The prefrontal cortex is very important for maintaining those executive functions like planning and learning and stuff like that. Supplementing healthy fats promotes cognitive function. This specific study in older adults with dance classes found a pretty extraordinary increase in cognitive function with just a little bit of dancing, I think, each week. Finally, you may have heard that in individuals who have Alzheimer's disease, they may have different amounts of plaques and tangles, the hallmarks of those disease, but have different levels of symptom severity. And of course, there are lots of factors that go into this. Neuroplasticity is not the only one, but one thing that can contribute to this is whether or not that person sort of has enough connections in their whole brain to help promote using those other parts of the brain to compensate for that damage. And again, that is not the only cause of that difference, but it is relevant to neuroplasticity. Finally, as I'd stated, physical activity may increase the production of that brain-derived neurotrophic factor in both young adults and older adults. So I hope that you found this interesting and helpful, and that you feel like you know more about neuroplasticity than when you started, and that you've learned some interesting things about brain health. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk I'm going to talk a little bit about the LEAP programs for those who are not familiar with them. But first, I just wanted to see if anyone has questions. I know that was quite a lot of information. Thank you for bearing with me. Yes, Judy.
If no one else, I always have a question.
That's great.
But if there's no one else, I mean, I don't want to hog it. But I still have a problem with if I did yard work straight for an hour and like raking for an hour, would that be considered just physical activity? Or
yes.
Even though it's like it's structured?
That's a good question. There is not a super clear line between physical activity and aerobic exercise. In general, that would fall more into the physical activity category, but if it feels somewhat strenuous, you might be able to put that into the exercise category. That is my not super satisfying answer, but there is not a very clear line. It's more just to help frame the different types of activities we do.
Because when I'm working in the yard, I get a good, I don't know, it's moderate, or, where I'm breathing.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, that wasn't the best answer. Rachel, if you have an additional thought there, feel free to chime in.
No, I agree that we would consider that to be physical activity. There could be a little overlap if you get your heart rate up, but exercise is specifically structured for the purpose of increasing fitness in targeted ways. So even though yard work is structured in that you're, you doing purposeful activities in your yard, it probably, we wouldn't call it exercise, but you might get your heart rate up, and that would be a good thing.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Misa, the recording, thank you for your comment. The recording will be ready hopefully like 30 minutes after the presentation, maybe sooner. And I will send you all a link to that recording.
Okay, well, you said there is such thing as the inability to generate new neurons.
Mm-hmm.
What could be the situation that the person is
So sort of luckily, there is not really a specific situation in which this happens, although you can improve your brain's ability to generate those new neurons. Research shows that kind of no matter what you're doing, unless you have severe damage in some cases, you just continue to generate new neurons, especially in your hippocampus, but also your olfactory bulb for whatever reason, which is, that's also important in memory. And you generate about 700 new neurons a day. So basically you don't have to do anything in most cases, but exercise, especially aerobic exercise, can specifically increase that brain-derived neurotrophic factor that tells your brain to make new neurons. Physical activity as well, though there's less research. I will say, and this is maybe an important thing I should have stated earlier, much but not all research shows that you can increase that brain-derived neurotrophic factor in older adulthood. So we know that you do continue to generate new neurons across the entire lifespan a lot, but not all research shows that you can sort of increase that process even more in older adulthood with exercise. So more research is needed.
Thank you.
Yep.
So the same things, same theme, the person's brain is not plastic to absorb things, you said. So that's the age is the one factor.
Yes, age is a factor, and neuroplasticity does naturally decrease with age, but it does not go away by any means. So it is, in general, a little harder to learn new skills in older adulthood for that reason. But
okay, so lots of things, exercise and other brains are doing other things, getting the new information, such as prevention or intervention. However, it cannot reverse. If you lost, it's lost forever.
That is basically correct. I'm trying to think of how to answer that question well. You can't reverse damage. So, for example, you can't reverse plaque buildup as far as I'm aware. But you could encourage your brain to help compensate for whatever ability was lost in that specific brain area by recruiting other areas of the brain. And sort of by doing these healthy lifestyle things, improving your ability to generate new neurons and continuing to stimulate your, to engage with the world, you are encouraging your brain to keep making those new adaptive connections that mitigate the damage. But as far as I know, no, you cannot directly say remove damage from an area of the brain, specifically when it comes to dementia.
Oh, dementia.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rosie, I have a question.
Go ahead.
When a person has emotional trauma,
Mhm.
what part of the brain is typically damaged?
I'm not an expert on this. This may sound a little strange, but damage is sort of a relative term. Not that we don't endure, a whole lot of issues and pain from emotional trauma, but that damage is your brain trying to adapt, sometimes in a not so helpful way, to the situation. So in some cases, if you kind of have a sort of well-established brain, if you're an adult and you endure trauma, your brain may bounce back pretty quickly to its original state. But in the case of where that doesn't happen, one thing that can happen, for example, is that your amygdala is overactivated. That is one of the key parts of the brain related to fear, and it sort of becomes triggered more easily. You create a lot of implicit memories. Those are subconscious memories that you couldn't necessarily articulate, but that influence your actions, that are associated with that overactivation of the amygdala. And those memories and responses are hard to address because, again, you can't sort of sort through them consciously. It takes work to understand where your reactions, or some would say triggers, are coming from. So that would be one way that your brain could adapt maladaptively to trauma. And that is unfortunately especially the case in childhood, when our brains are more plastic and we're more susceptible to that. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and also the other day I saw somewhere on, I guess, social media or email or something, that there's a drug, I guess they're using it in Great Britain, called lecanemab, something like that, and it undoes the amyloid plaque and it helps in early Alzheimer's, and they stated that it was a breakthrough, that this is like a big huge deal, and but it's not available, I guess, yet in the US. It has to go through the
yeah, through the FDA and everything, probably. Rachel says she's going to find the statement that Dr. Burns, who's the director of the ADRC, made on lecanemab. Also, for those who don't know, Rachel is the program director, lead program director. I am the program assistant.
And I guess this is the first, they said it was the first time that a drug has been found to do this. I
Mhm.
mean, it's like huge deal is what they were saying.
Yeah, it definitely may be a big deal. I sort of, as an ADRC staff member, I don't want to overpromise because a lot more research is needed to understand its effectiveness, and there have been some adverse effects associated with it. So
Oh,
I'm
that's
not sure. Hopefully it will be a very good intervention, but a lot more research is needed. But yeah, Rachel is going to hunt down that statement, the official statement.
now maybe
Um,
it's going to lead to something else that would be less side effects or something, hopefully.
Yeah.
We don't want bad side effects.
Okay, I found the email that I was looking for. I have somewhere that provides a little bit more detail. I couldn't find it at the moment, but those of you who are in our LEAP weekly groups, I can find it before Monday and share it with you. Those of you who are not in that, once you complete LEAP courses, you have access to weekly meetings where we talk about updates and things like this. So all right, so what Dr. Burns said was that the detailed results presented on the drug lecanemab are exciting. We are examining the data very closely and will await the FDA's decision to approve the drug in the coming months. While we are hopeful that this will be a new tool for our patients in the next year, it's not clear that this is a cure. It's clear that this is not a cure, excuse me. The benefits are modest and the drug comes with some risk. Nonetheless, the new data represents one of the first big wins in the effort to effectively slow the progression of Alzheimer's in our patients. So exciting, not a cure, but definitely progress. So that is the information that I have on the new drug at the moment.
Yeah, thank you.
Would you spell that, the name of that drug, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. I can put that in the chat, lecanemab. All of the mAbs are, they're biologics, which is interesting because I believe they change your gene expression, which is cool. Any other questions?
Did you spell that, the name of that?
Yeah, it's in the chat. Do you see it in the chat?
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well,
I have another one if I don't want to, and that is more about exercise, because I am at a point where just walking and briskly is, I don't know, I'm falling back on it. I wondered if I do some dancing, because I like that. I mean, it sounds kind of strange, but
that's not strange at all. That's
but
great.
for like a half hour, continuous, not exercise, but it's would raise my heart rate.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds good to me. And dancing definitely, I think, does kind of as exercise, at least to most people.
Because I might, I'm getting, I don't know what it is. I'm resisting doing the walking. So I thought maybe I'd switch to, that's the only other thing I can think of is the dancing.
Yeah,
If I keep it up for a half hour.
That's a great form of exercise.
Get my heart rate up. It doesn't have to be labeled exercise or
physical activity.
Or physical activity to get your heart rate up. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. I would say that in the case of dancing, that's more often going to fall into the the exercise category.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Because you're
It's fun
dancing
too.
specifically to get your heart rate up.
Right.
Well, that would be like jumping up and down on a what do you want to call it?
Trampoline.
Trampoline, yeah. Thank you. That would be, or doing things on a trampoline. That would be exercise. All right. Thank you.
It's fun too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jan.
Janice shared that there's a Zumba group that's free in Argentina on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If you like the dance, Judy.
Oh, say that again. Zumba.
Zumba. It's dance aerobics
Yeah, but it's where on what?
on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in Argentine.
What does that mean, Argentine?
It's a neighborhood. Janice, okay, she's gonna send us more info. So we'll
Send it, you mean, send how to get in there. All right. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for the nice comments. I wanted to talk about, wow, it's not clicking through. Sorry, there we go. So if you have any lingering questions, you can ask right after this. But for those who are not familiar with the LEAP programs, I thought I would go over the upcoming programs because neuroplasticity is one of the things that's sort of at the core of the lifestyle changes that we make at LEAP that can really help improve your brain health. And so, as I was saying, nutrition is important for neuroplasticity. And one of our key LEAP courses is the Mediterranean diet course. So this course is 4 weeks long. It's going to start on January 10th. And it includes these live Zoom classes that talk about different aspects of the Mediterranean diet, which is an evidence-based eating pattern that can really help improve brain health and overall well-being. Also, our director, Rachel, is a dietitian. We've got lots of information about building brain healthy meals, tips on getting plenty of nutrients, and information about healthy fats, because that can be sometimes a confusing topic. We have these printable worksheets, resources, and recipes, and a weekly recipe challenge. And like all of our offerings, it is totally free and completely online. So this will begin on January 10th, as I said. I see a question. Oh. Sorry, Amy, what's your question there?
I was just trying to get more information on how to sign on to that Zoom early morning Argentine Zumba group. And Rosie, I know you mentioned you might, maybe I misunderstood, but yesterday maybe you knew of some free like high intensity stuff. Is that right?
Sorry, you were cutting out a little bit, but we have a page of exercise resources that I could send to you that has different types of sort of exercise programs and videos for you to check out. So I'd be happy.
That's great.
All right. So, and next, the sort of core course, though the Mediterranean diet course is just as awesome, is Brain Health Bootcamp. And this covers the major brain healthy lifestyle topics. It's things you might imagine, like, let's see, stress, nutrition as well, stress, sleep, exercise and physical activity, and I think one or two more that I am missing right now, social engagement and cognitive engagement. And so this course has 6 modules, one that's for each of these major lifestyle factors, with 2 weeks spent on nutrition. And this also has a weekly Zoom session with Rachel and myself that has Q&A, and we also go into detail about that week's topic. In addition to that, this course has more activities and videos for you to do at your own pace for each week. So you can access the online portal to watch those videos and learn at your own pace, and then also attend those weekly Zoom calls. Finally, we do have our brain power blueprints. Some of you may already have this, some of you may not, which is sort of like the one thing that we do sell at LEAP, which is our big old book that has a lot of additional information about these lifestyle factors. That is an optional $30 purchase. And it is not at all necessary for Brain Health Bootcamp, but if you want to follow along, you can. Wow, I don't know what's going on here. If you would like to join these courses and haven't already, you can visit kubrainhealth.org/leap. You can use this link to either sign up for those courses or for My Alliance, which is sort of the core of it is this weekly newsletter provided by the ADRC with links to resources and helpful brain health information. but that can help you get connected to sort of like that broader group of resources that we offer. Finally, you can email us with any questions you have, and I will be sending you an email after this presentation with a link to that recording, as well as more specific links to some of these resources and the option to RSVP for further brain health highlights. Thank you everyone for attending. I really appreciate it. I know it was a lot of information and I hope that you found it helpful. And I hope that you will join some of the other LEAP programs if you're interested. Feel free to go on your merry way or ask any questions. I'll stay on for a few minutes. Thanks everyone.
I had one, but I forgot.
Okay, you said can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I'm still on the same theme of this injured brain. Suppose you had a TBI, traumatic brain injury, maybe 30, 35 years ago.
Right.
I thought it didn't affect. However, I overheard a few times that could start expressing in older age. Those are things, so you said you cannot reverse. However, all the things you mentioned might somehow keep alive or keep it up at bay.
So, sorry, yeah. I understand your question. I think it might have been a little confusing. When I was talking about not being able to reverse damage, I was sort of not clearly trying to be specific to Alzheimer's disease plaques, because I wanted to be clear that in that case, you can't remove the plaques yet. In the case of a TBI, I'm less knowledgeable, but I do believe it is possible to regain function in the parts of the brain that were damaged, not only compensating with other parts of the brain. I would need to do more research, but I believe that is possible in certain cases. It just specifically in the case of Alzheimer's disease and plaques, you can't directly address, at least so far, that damage in that very specific area, the buildup of those plaques, is my understanding. Did that help?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Rachel, you unmuted yourself. Did you have a?
I was just gonna mention that it depends on the severity of the TBI. We know that brain injury does increase risk for dementia. It's one of the reasons that the football brain injuries have gotten so much attention in the media in the last several years, because football players are at significantly increased risk for brain diseases because of that. So it depends on, severity and frequency and all of those things as far as how much a brain injury would impact your long-term function and brain health. But in general, our brain has the ability to work around those problems and heal from those problems and try to figure out, rewiring to work around injuries. It does depend on the severity of the injury and the location and things like that.
Okay, if anybody else is not asking, I have one more question. The injury done by alcoholic abuse?
I'm going to give my best answer. I'm not at all an expert. Some damage done by alcohol abuse, especially during a critical period like adolescence, could be compensated for, but is not reversible. They found that it sometimes can damage your brain enough that it's not reversible, that you would just be compensating as opposed to those specific parts of your brain sort of healing through neuroplasticity. Other than that, I don't know. I assume that it would depend a lot on how long you have been abusing alcohol, how old you are, and other factors.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
what place does nutrition play in neuroplasticity? Is
Um,
it? It's not. It doesn't sound like it's a building block.
No, it definitely is a building block. Yeah, sorry if I could have been more clear about that. But so, for example, that main example is that your brain contains a lot of fat. And so your neurons, a large percentage of their composition is fat, especially the neuron membrane, I believe. That may not be correct. But anyway, getting enough omega-3s, those healthy fats, those anti-inflammatory
Yeah.
fats, really helps boost your neuron integrity. In addition, a healthy diet in general will help reduce inflammation in your body, which helps your neurons be healthier as well.
But it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's not a building block.
I would say that it is, because specifically when we're talking about targeting the integrity of neurons, eating well helps those neurons be healthier and stronger.
There are a lot of less, I'd say they may feel indirect, but they're still foundational. So for example, if you have an inflammatory diet, such as the standard American diet, where you're eating lots of sugar and unhealthy fats, I'll turn my camera back on, and things that are going to promote inflammation in your brain, that is going to compromise your ability to have a healthy brain. So certainly foundational. Having an anti-inflammatory diet, eating the healthy fats, balancing your blood sugar, having neuroprotective phytonutrients regularly present in your diet, all of those things are laying the foundation for neuroplasticity to continue to work. DHA, which is a type of omega-3, is considered critical for brain development in babies and toddlers and young children, and it remains important in older adults, but it is a absolutely foundational compound in our brains. We need that there to develop healthy brain. Did that help at all?
You know, the more I go into this, it just seems like it's like a puzzle. Everything, you don't get everything at once, and these pieces just kind of, I don't know, come into mind.
That's why Brain Health Boot Camp is 6 weeks long, and then we keep meeting after that.
See, I don't remember you. I know you probably said it, that the common American food is inflammatory.
Well, the standard American diet.
Yeah, the standard American diet. So we have a lot of people running around with inflamed brains, right? Inflammation in the brain.
Inflamed everything, yes. Inflammation is related to a lot of chronic conditions. So cardiovascular disease is an inflammatory disease. A lot of the common problems that we have include inflammation as a component to that process.
So you would say not food, but diet, or food or diet, which is the right?
Both. Diet, the word diet just means the food that you eat on a regular basis.
Okay. Oh, so that's why there's probably a lot of heart disease and.
Yep.
Poor judgment.
Thank you. This was totally wonderful, and I look forward to the recording. I have to go over.
Okay. Well,
thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for attending. I appreciate it.
Bye, Rachel. Thanks,
Thank
Rosie.
you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Rachel. Bye, Judy.
Rachel, I'm still gonna answer that email.
Okay.
But
No.
yes, you can feel
It's been
free.
I guess I have a lot of yard work yet. I've just been overwhelmed with stuff to do. So
No rush. Take your
probably,
time.
I mean, you're probably more overwhelmed than I am.
Well, some
Not a
days maybe.
contest.
But you're younger, you can take it. You can take it at
Some
your
days
age.
I don't feel young.
Well, I bet.
Everest was up with croup half the night last night, so I feel very
Oh.
not young this morning.
Oh, poor little guy.
Yeah, he's okay.
Is he just have a cold?
Yeah, he's fine. All right, any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Julie.
Rosie, good job. Okay, leave.